Hey guys, it's me. I'm trying to be all pro and shit and put some music in front of it because I don't know how to do that post production. Good way to start it off. Choking on my own words. How's everybody doing? Hello, Kayleen. Are you the only one out there with me right now? Give it a few minutes. It says I got 2 viewers here. Somebody else. Hey Bard, how you doing, buddy? I went for the intro music, man. I think I flubbed the buttons a little bit, but you know, I tried to get it going. Hey Jason. So I'll just sit here and ramble on about myself for a minute while we're waiting for people to filter in. Had kind of a crazy day. Won't go into a lot of detail, but I've only been home about 30 or 45 minutes or so. I've slapped together my notes and everything. I think I'm ready to go. If I seem a little out of sorts, please be gentle. My day kind of went to hell and everything's fine. It just... I ended up not being home much today. But aside from that, before today happened, I have been working on, I got 2 books in the works. I'm working on the Brace Cordova, the Cordova Pursuit, which is the Brace Cordova series, book 3. That's my space opera series. It's coming along nicely. Feel good about it. I've got... on the weekends, I'm working on Child of Magic, which is the second Pickman Files book. If anybody, I'm sure you've heard me talk about Master of Hounds, the first book in that series. And I've my story for the anthology is out there waiting for the tender mercies of the editors. And I also have another short story that's with an editor right now that I'm trying to polish up a little bit that I'm going to release just because I can't stand having something sit around doing nothing. So I'm going to put it out there in the world and let it see if it can make a couple of, you know, some coffee money or something. Aside from that, just doing what I do, man, writing books and taking care of my kids. So let's see, anybody else filtering in? Hi, Paul. Welcome. Gonna give it a couple of more minutes. What are you guys up to? Somebody tell me something up here in the chat. I know I'm not the only one doing stuff. So you guys got anything interesting going on? Anything you want to throw out there real quick? No? Okay, I'm doing it again. I was told not to ask questions to the chat and just sit there and be quiet because that's like bad podcasting stuff. So I probably shouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. Hey, Bill, how you doing? Let's see. Bard is working on editing Cryos and Jade. Yes. Very cool. That's the one that we did the little critique of on the show, I believe it was. Jason says he's getting over a nasty cold. Well, good luck with that, Jason. Hope you feel better, man. Kayleen says, my what if questions have become a beast. Okay, we can address that. I like that. Bard, ready for publishing on the 13th. Congrats, Bard. That's good, man. I like to see people making moves. Good for you. Bill, just finished 1 novel. First draft done. Still planning for NaNoWriMo. Good. You should always have something in the works. Let's see. All right, well, we got a few people on board now. We can go ahead and get started. As the title says, and Paul also says that he is writing first draft of the 3rd book in Weird Westerns. I love some Weird West stuff, man. I want to write a little bit of that myself. I ran some role-playing games in a setting like that a while back, and the setting is always stuck in my head. Bill, 20 things in the works. I feel your pain, man. But anyway, as I was saying, as the title says, this is Tactical Storytelling with yours truly, part 2. On the last episode, we basically talked about what this is. It's a process for planning out a novel so that you can, when you're done doing this process, you can sit down and start writing and get everything you should need to get you from Once Upon a Time to the end on a first draft, not a fully polished and publishable novel, but the first draft so that you've got something to polish and perfect so that you can publish. We basically came up last time with our idea, or setting the goal, as I like to call it. Tactical storytelling is based on a method of thinking that I learned years and years ago when I joined the Air Force, where you set a goal, you gather intelligence, you formulate a plan, you execute the plan. And I, over the years, thought that that is basically how I like to write stories. So I sort of adapted this for classes and things that I teach locally for people that are just getting into writing. So last time we set our goal. We formulated an idea for a story, and we formulated this idea in the form of questions. We talked about where ideas come from, and in my opinion, ideas are everywhere, and they come from observing the world around you, asking questions about these things that you observe, and then coming up with your own answers. That's where the creativity part comes in. I'm going to try and do this little screen share thing again, if I can remember how, and there, and boom, and share. So if you're following along at home, I hope everyone can see that. Basically, I created this question. What if a serial killer was loose in Atlanta? What if the serial killer was in a cult? What if the cult had real power? What if a police detective and her journalist brother have to stop the killer? And what if no one else believes that the killer is special? Not a terribly original idea, but it has entertainment potential. So that was my idea. And those of you following along at home should have come up with something similar to that, or, in your own words. Obviously, you don't have to copy me specifically, because I don't encourage anyone to do that. And we'll just turn that off, and I'm back. So did anybody do that? I know Kayleen says that her list of things has become a beast. Did anybody else jump in there and come up with some ideas? Anybody that might have been watching last week? Anyone at all? Did you have your story questions, your story ideas? Because today what we're going to do is we are going to start doing our research. Bill says he has a list. That's good. Jason's got one. Great. I'm glad to see you guys are jumping in on this. That's excellent. Bill, person, problem, places. Got him. Good job, Bill. All right. So in this step, now that we've set our goal and we've come up with our problem, or our idea for the book, we're going to go into the gather intelligence portion of what I like to call tactical storytelling. Essentially, at this point, you're going to start doing your research. And when you're writing a novel, this can vary in a lot of different ways, because it's going to depend on the genre of the novel. It's going to depend on, the setting, the time period it's written in, there's a whole bunch of different things that can affect this. And the question I think I get most often when I start, when I put this idea out there of doing research is, but Chuck, I'm writing an epic fantasy, or I'm writing an epic science fiction thing. None of the things that I'm writing about exist in the world for me to research. That's a legit thing. Magic's not real, so you can't really research magic except for the magical, pseudo-religious, whatever, I don't know what you'd call them, what the proper term is, but just the traditions and things that we have that we equate to magic in the real world. But if you're talking about people are throwing fireballs around and summoning dragons and demons and whatnot, that's hard to research. So for things like that, I suggest that if you're let's say you're writing epic fantasy, and you need to do some research. Well, the people in these settings, they need to be in some way relatable to a reader that is in our world. And because that's the people that are going to be reading the book. So you want elements that are familiar to your reader to kind of help pull them in. So let's say you're writing an epic fantasy, and there are two different disparate countries in your book. Let's say there's one that's Eastern and one that's Western. Well, let's say the Eastern one is an island, and the Western one is a bigger continent. You could go and look at, say, feudal Japan, and look at the types armor they wore, the way their governments were structured, how their military, the whole samurai shogun kind of stuff, how that was all structured from the peasant to the grand poobah shogun guy. See how their political stuff was set up. That's research you could do that would translate to your book. Even if you make the people that populate that island elves or whatever's, somebody's going to read that and go, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds like Shogun. That sounds like a samurai movie. That sounds like, whatever. But it's going to be, even though it's going to be alien and fantasy, it's going to be relatable enough that they'll latch on to it. So basically for like fantasy and space opera and that kind of thing, when you're writing these big epic things with big settings and big worlds, your research is going to be into taking the familiar that has elements of what you want to portray in your book and leaving just enough of the real under that coating of the fantasy to keep your readers engaged and make them feel like they recognize what's going on. Because if you have something so completely original, never been seen before, don't know where it came from, just completely and totally original, sometimes that becomes work. Sometimes I've heard readers complain sometimes that they really had to think about it and focus, and that's not always what they want to do when they're reading for entertainment value. So just remember that there's always some research you can do. Another question I get on this is, well, I'm writing a thriller set in just today. No magic, no super science, no nothing. It's just a straight up mystery thriller thing. Okay, great. But the thing you need to remember about today's real world is that there are worlds within worlds. If I was writing, and this is actually something I've been looking at lately because I've been thinking about writing a police mystery, I would have to go to people I know, looking at you, Moon and Hayes, to find out what it's really like to be a policeman. Not the shit you see on TV or the political crap you see on the internet or any of that. I would need to go to that subculture of law enforcement and really find out what it's like to be a cop. If one of those guys wanted to write a medical thriller or something like that, I might be one of the people they come to see what it's really like to work in a hospital in a trauma unit, because that's what I did for a lot of years back in the day. So the thing to remember in real world research is there are worlds within our world, and not everybody's part of every world. I have no idea what it's like to be a ballerina, because could you see me, with the tutu and all that? No, that ain't going to work. That's not happening. It's just not. So I would have to go talk to dancers, and I would have to really dig into it to just get those nuggets of realism that people who are familiar with that world will read some stuff that's not necessarily accurate for entertainment value, taking the whole writer's privilege precedent kind of thing, put enough of the realism in there that you hold on to everybody, because there's nothing worse than reading something and just going, oh, that's just utter blah, 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 because it's just unbelievable. People will take a little in a book like that. They'll take a little bit of the okay, it's just fun that way, as long as there's a strong foundation of realism in it. So there's always research to be done. That's my point. No matter what you're writing, no matter how fantastic or how mundane it might be, there's always some research that can be done. So how do I go about doing this? What are the steps I take to get my research done for a book? Well, I always look at it this way. My book's going to have three elements. It's going to have people, it's going to have places, it's going to have things. The people are obviously the characters. Now, I'm one of those guys that before I sit down and start writing, I like to kind of cast my stories. I like to scour the internet and look for pictures that inspire me and kind of fire me up and help the character kind of gel in my mind, that kind of thing. And I'm going to do another of these screen share dealios, if you'll bear with me for just a moment, and show you what I'm talking about. Application window, share, boom. Okay, so right here, what you see is a folder I keep on my desktop. It's called Faces. And whenever I'm getting ready to cast a book, I think, okay, I need this main character, this bad guy, this supporting character. The really important. I don't cast every single character that they come across, but the important ones, the ones I'm going to be spending a lot of time with, these are the guys that I try to cast. For instance, if you look right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I am circling the face of a guy. This was the fellow that I cast as Jubal Mott in Master of Hounds, for anybody that might have read that. He was basically the main villain. This is the guy, Robin Lord Taylor, I think his name is, with some changes. I took his face and his basic body type, and I gave him blonde hair and mismatched eyes, and he became Arlo Dandridge. And then there's another one down here for the guy that was Clint Mercer. But you see my point. I went through the internet. I collect these interesting looking faces. Sometimes they're actors like these two guys are. Sometimes they're just faces I run across. I think there's a couple of those on here. Well, it won't scroll because I'm sharing. But anyway, you get the idea. So let's say I wanted to cast my detective. Well, this young lady right here, Ashley Johnson, that's a perfect picture too, because she's got a badge on her belt. I think that's from the show she's in, Blind Spot. She'd be great for that. Let's say she's going to be my detective, and then maybe her brother could be this Matthew Mercer. He's the rogue blogger, journalist, free spirit. She's the by the book police detective, very career oriented, and they kind of work in tandem to bring down our bad guy. Excuse me again. And then I could go through this and I would find the bad guy, and I would just continue until I had faces for all of the characters that I wanted to work with, so that I could put them in my Scrivener notes and I actually have a picture of them there while I'm writing. I find that when you start writing things that have a lot of characters in them, those visual cues, that picture, those visual aids there, those help a lot, and for me to keep the characters in mind, to remind me of, like, okay, I wanted them to be, angry or silly or whatever. That's the kind of pictures I look for that evoke the general personality that I wanted to attach to that character. So that's how I kind of do the people. Another thing I do with the people is, if it's especially the villains, I like to do this. And I think I've mentioned this a number of times before, but I will sit down and I'll have that picture in front of me, and I'll start in the character's voice. I'll start having them introduce themselves to me, and I will write them talking to me in their voice and basically saying hello. It could just be like, hey, my name's Clint Mercer. I was in the Air Force, just like that. And I try to capture their voice so that that's a little more gelled in my mind. And again, in my Scrivener, I'll put, if I need to, I'll put that it's just a paragraph or something. It's not too crazy, but I'll put that under the picture. So if I'm really having trouble with a scene or something, I can refer back to these. I can get back to their voice, the way they would word things. Would they curse? Would they use big words instead of small words? Are they verbose and just talk? Or are they, do they do the whole Jethro Gibbs economy of words things where they're just, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Just stuff like that. Or do they rattle on, kind of like I'm doing now? You can also dig into their backgrounds. Where do they live? What's their favorite food? Who was their first love in high school? Just anything that might be relevant for you to help make that character alive for you, you want to ask that question. A lot of times I find that if I explore what do they do for a living and why do they do that for a living, you know, I'm going to refer back again to Clint Mercer and Master of Hounds. His true north is helping people, saving people. He joined the Air Force because he wanted to become a pararescueman, and he wanted to parachute into dangerous places to save people that needed saving. That's the life that he felt was worth living. And when he got out of the service, he went into emergency and trauma nursing because that was another way he could help people that needed help. He doesn't really give a care who the person is, but if somebody needs help, he's the guy that's going to be the first one running to the trouble to help the person. It's not even so much about getting the bad guy with him. It's about saving the people that need saving. So you see what I'm saying there? The choice of his profession was really just an extension of that personality that I was trying to capture in the book. And I think that that's a really good way to flesh out your characters, because a lot of times we'll say, yes, they do, but knowing the why is important too. Why is a person angry, or why are they a criminal? Or you see what I'm saying, I'm sure. So let's say we've got all that. We've got our persons, we've got our pictures, we feel the characters are strong, we've written some introductions, having a little conversation with the character there. We've explored their background a little bit. You know, maybe there's some traumatic event, and we know why they chose to become a, you know, adventuring pretzel vendor, what the hell ever you decide to come up with. And we really feel like we've got the characters. Well, now we need to move on to the places. And places is the setting. One of the best things that I found for writing in the modern world for settings is Google Earth. That to me is an invaluable. If I can't drive somewhere to actually be there physically and take pictures and that sort of thing, and if you can do that, I strongly encourage it, because nothing gives you a better feel for a place than actually walking through it. I believe I did a video when I was writing Master of Hounds where I went to the cemetery where they had a shootout, and I think I posted. I don't remember if I did or not, but anyway, the point is, if you can go to the place physically, do that. But if you can't, Google Earth, where you can zoom into that street view where it's the satellite picture view and you can actually go down streets and things. That's great. It's not perfect because, you know, you're not really there. You can't really smell it and that sort of thing, but it'll give you an idea of like how sparse the houses are set apart, or what kind of trees are there along the road. Little details like that that you can throw into your setting to make it feel real for people that might be from that region. I'm writing a new book now where the first chapter, the first scene is taking place in Michigan. I've never been to Michigan. But there's a small town there in Michigan that I wanted to use. So I went on Google Earth and I went down and I picked out streets and areas, and I said, oh, okay, I'm going to put the bad guy's house over here. I'm going to have the good guys come in from this direction, and they'll run into that street or that obstacle and that sort of thing. So if you're writing in the modern world, I strongly advise you to use the Google Earth and to, you know, not be shy with it, man. Take a lot of screenshots, take a lot of notes, because that can really add to the setting and make it feel like you've actually been there and like the characters are actually there. Now, if you're writing the fantasy or the space opera, this is also a valuable skill, because let's say you want to write something set on an alien planet. But you don't want it to look, you know, you want it to be largely undeveloped, very lush, very, you know, very jungle-like, you know, big trees. Nobody's really been there to chop them down and build houses and things. So you want big trees, you want big leafed plants, lots of flowers and vines and things like that. Get pictures of that. Get big, you know, take screenshots of that. Google images, find jungle pictures, look at those. And then you can put the alien stuff on top of them. Because if you take what I just said and start adding fluorescent colors and moss that lights up when you step on it, and big firefly looking bugs around, and then you stick some blue furred aliens in it. Avatar. Because that's pretty much what that setting was. It was a undeveloped jungle-like setting that had all those fantasy little elements in it. So you could take these pictures that you get from Google Images or whatever, and then you can say, okay, so this plant's, these big leaf plants are gonna hum when you walk by them, and they're not green, they're purple. And you run with that. But the research is still useful, because same thing as with the characters, you can put those up on your screen as you're writing a scene in that setting, or you're describing that setting. And you can just say, okay, yeah, all right, I remember that, instead of trying to pull everything straight out of your head. And the little details will matter. The reader will pick up on them. It will add that small level of verisimilitude that will carry you through in that reader engagement. It will keep them pulled in. And that's what you want to do. You want people to start reading your book and get so lost in it that they lose track of time. The best compliment I got on Master of Hounds was from a buddy of mine who texted me, it was about a week ago, guy I used to work with years ago. He texted me and said, "You son of a bitch, if I get fired today because I was up all night reading your latest, I'm coming to your house and beating your ass." And I thought, yay, man, thanks. That's awesome. Because that told me he got lost in the book and he really, really enjoyed it. So that's what you want. And little details, the little things are going to be like just the little nails that keep the reader's attention pinned on your book. So don't be afraid to do research, again, for any genre. And don't be afraid to get pictures and descriptions, see what other writers have done as far as descriptions go. I'm not telling you to plagiarize, but come on, nothing's new under the sun. Steal from the best. So find people that have written about those settings, see what they said, put your own twist on their descriptions, and just use what's out there to try and add this sense of realism to your work. All right, so we've got our places. One more thing on places. For my book, since I'm setting my serial killer thing in Atlanta, I would go to Google Earth, and I would think to myself, all right, let's say I would decide how many murders I wanted to have happened. Let's say there were 3 murders prior to the book starting. Well, I would look at Google Earth and I would pick out 3 spots that look like a good place to dump a body. I might pick out, my detective lives here. Her brother lives here. The police department where they work is over here on this part of town. And I would have maybe a screenshot or something of that. I might even print it out, and I'd have those points marked. That way, as I'm describing the book, I would know, okay, it takes about this long to get from the detective's house to this murder scene. And it takes about this long for the police to respond from that scene to some year or something like that. It doesn't have to be exact. I think 99.9% of the readers out there there's always going to be somebody, but they're not going to worry if you're off by, 5 or 10 minutes or whatever. But again, it's that little bit of realism that will keep them pulled in. So if you're setting something in a city that's real and in the modern world, don't be afraid to map it out and say, okay, this happened over here, this happened over there, this happened over there, and this is how I want my hero or my heroine moving through that setting. James, what if you're setting your murders in Atlantis? Well, James, what I would tell you to do is read a lot of Aquaman comic books and just keep doing that. So we've got our places, we got our people. Now we got to think about things. Now this one's a little bit different. For some books, the things are very important. Like if you're writing a thriller and the big threat to the world is some sort of super nuclear bio bomb or something like that, something that is real in the sense that, yes, nuclear bombs exist, biological weapons exist. somehow you figure out a way those two get married together into something just horrific. You want to know about those things. You want to learn some stuff about nuclear bombs, because if you have to bring in a character who's a bomb expert, they're going to want to drop a little lingo and a little jargon that makes it feel realistic and makes it feel real. So when you're talking about things, you're talking about the objects that are relevant to the book and the story. Again, for thrillers, you're looking at things like weapons, vehicles, especially if you're writing like the Tom Clancy military technology type stuff, because people that enjoy that tend to get pretty picky about the details. So you're going to want to do a lot of research into that. People who are really into guns want gunplay to be accurate 99% of the time. Some of them can be forgiving. Some of them can be complete dicks. I've gotten both on either end of the spectrum. It just depends on the individual. But you don't want to just completely ignore the realism of it. I mean, you still want to write a fun story, fun action story, but you don't want to just ignore the fact that revolvers don't have clips. You know, you don't, and that you know, the different way you slap a clip or rock a clip or whatever. It's, you want to have some level of knowledge enough to, again, add enough realism to satisfy people that pay attention to details like that. Other things could be, maybe you're writing a Dan Brown type thriller and there's a work of art there that is relevant to the story. Well, you want to learn as much as you can. Okay, magazines, Bill, whatever you want to call them. But you want to know as much as you can about that work of art and how it's relevant to the story, and make it, you know, just again, make it believable. If you're writing the fantasy or the space opera, you want to know enough about space and physics that in space and things like that to make it plausible. Now, the further out you get into space opera, the more it becomes, you know, the more hand wavium there is. If you're writing hard science, you want to know a lot of hard science. I consider that a thing too. In fantasy, you want to make the weapons recognizable. Let's go back to our example of the elves living on the island, and we've modeled it after ancient Japan. Well, let's give them katanas. We don't have to call them katanas, but we can describe them like they're katanas, and we can say they're forged like katanas are forged, and they look like katanas look, and that sort of thing. And if you know enough about those weapons, you can describe them in such a way that the reader goes, "Oh, yeah, okay, that's a fantasy katana," and they're good with it, and they just keep riding the ride that you're trying to get them to ride. So that is what. Sorry, guys. Yes, Christy, that's true. My main character, Embrace Cordova. I'm sorry, guys. Christy says that she knows enough about space to know it's terrifying and wants us dead. That is true. My main character, Brace Cordova, in my space opera series, has a tattoo that has a space helmet floating through open vacuum, and the inscription is "Space does not care about you." So that is a very true sentiment. And if you guys have questions, please fire them out. I'll try and catch them as I'm running my mouth here. So anyway, yes, you want to know about the things in the story, and this really goes to setting and or plot, depending on how you're using these things. You want to know if you're doing guns, you want to know your gunplay, you want to know your weapons. If you're doing fantasy, you want to know threat type things if you're doing thrillers, or historical things if you're doing thrillers, stuff like that. Those all fall under the category of things. So okay, so anybody, anything at all? No, just lots of shenanigans tonight. I feel like I'm generating solo shenanigans without the other guys here. I hope they're not jealous. James says that space is just lonely and wants our company. I like that, James. That's pretty funny. Okay, so that's our research element. We've researched our people, our places, and our things. We've ironed out who we want in the story, what they're like, where they live, where the action's taking place, and all the stuff they're going to encounter along the way. Kayleen, how do we take our what ifs into the next stage? That's a very good question, Kayleen. And that is why I think I am going to fold the next step of tactical storytelling into this episode. Because the next step of tactical storytelling is to formulate a plan. And formulating a plan goes back to the questions. And this is where my lack of preparation may come to bite me in the ass, but I'm going to try and wing it here. So when I say we're going to formulate a plan, I know most of you out there are thinking, okay, this is outlining. And it kind of is, but not really. Not in the way you're thinking, not in the, we're going to write out every single thing that happens in the story and we're going to stick to this like our lives depend upon it. No, that's not what we're going to do. To me, that's not really much fun. But what we can do is that we can look at the story we want to write. We can look at our what ifs, and we can take those and apply them to all the research we just did. So just try and bear with me here. Every story is going to have a few, I don't care what method you use. I don't care if it's snowflake or 3-act structure or 5-act structure or modified 3-act structure, whatever. Every story are going to have some elements in common. There's going to be some points that every story hits just by nature of it being a story. And what we can do is that we can plan those points. I keep this little guy over here on my board, and you can find it online. It's called the plot dot. I don't know if you can see that clearly or not. It's backwards to me when I show it up to my camera. But basically, it's a modified 3-act structure, really. But it's essential scenes. And I don't even necessarily say that all of these scenes are essential, but what they do, and I'll hold it up again. You see how it makes a big kind of a bullseye? You know, it's a circle, and then there's that nice bullseye at the middle. That's the finished story, in my opinion. And what I do is I kind of plot out the points. All right. So I always have an opening that's like the normal world. So you start at normal. And then you hit your inciting incident. The inciting incident is basically where your protagonist intersects with the problem of the plot. Okay. In the case of the book I'm talking about, it would be where the detective gets called to the first murder that she gets assigned to. Okay. That's where she is intersecting with the problem. The problem is the murders need to be stopped, and this is where she joins into it. So that would be my inciting incident. First plot point, they call that the point of no return. That could be where she discovers something weird about the murders that really pulls her in. You know, something that shouldn't be possible but was, and she's the kind of character that she can't let that go. You know, she's locked in. It's also called the lock-in. She's locked into the plot now. No matter what, even if her captain says, you're off the case, she's still going to pursue this to the end of the world. So there's that point. And then you can go from there. You can go to the black moment, the climax, the conclusion, all of that. What I'm saying is you can get this little plot dot and you can plot out all of these points. Okay. And you can figure out what is going to happen in the story to satisfy those points, and just write that out. 1 sentence per. That's it. She gets called to the crime scene. She discovers that the killer had to walk through a wall. She gets locked in at that point, you know, and so on and so forth. Now, what do these accomplish once you have these? We'll just go with the plot dot and say 8. Okay, there's 8 of those. So let's say you have a sentence for each one of those 8 points. All right. That's great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they happen boom, 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 boom in order. The first thing is obviously going to be chapter 1. You meet your character. They go on in their normal life. That could be 2 or 3 chapters. And then maybe you don't get your inciting incident until chapter 3, chapter 4. And then maybe you don't get your lock-in until chapter 8, chapter 9. You know, there's lots of room between. And in those in-between spaces is where you would do your discovery writing. Okay, that's where you can play with different things. You know, let yourself, maybe you introduce a love interest in chapter 3 or 2 or 5 or whatever. You know, maybe you you go in and you leave things. You can plot it out chapter by chapter if you want, or you can just have normal, inciting incident, and then just do your free writing between those 2 points. The point is you want to have a target. That next plot point that you have put a sentence on, one of those 8 things, you're always writing towards that. You have your discovery area between the 2 points where you can have fun with it, let your imagination get a little crazy, but you always want to keep it on target for that point, for that next plot point. That's what you're writing towards. Everything you write should be moving you towards that point, or in some way complicating that point or adding something to that point. And you just keep doing this, okay, from point to point to point until you get to your conclusion, your climax, whatever you want to call it. That, I consider those plot points targets. And when I start writing, it's like firing off a round at one of those targets. And as long as I'm keeping that narrative straight on those targets, I know I'm always moving towards the end, because the end is where we want to get. That's the point of all of this. The whole reason I started doing these was because I saw so many people who would start writing and then they would just get lost in the weeds. Their minds would wander. They'd really have no plan. They'd have no direction. They'd have no reason to focus. But if you already know that you want your story to go from she gets a call to see a body, she discovers something impossible, there's another murder, all the way down to, say, a big showdown in the Atlanta aquarium or something, you know you're moving to that big showdown. So you always want to keep writing in that direction. And that's how the plot points help. They will keep you on track. But they will still give you that fun in between space where you can discovery write. And here's the great thing about this. Let's say you're writing between point 2 and point 4 or point 3, and something you write is a great idea, but it changes point 3. Great. Scratch out point 3, write point 3 in to include the thing you just discovered. No, there are no writing police that are going to come kick down your door and haul you off to writer jail for changing your outline. Outlines are not sacrosanct. They're not carved in, not physical laws. You can first damn place. You can change it any damn way you want. That's the way it works. But you always want to have a little bit of that structure there to keep you moving forward. That doesn't mean you can't change the plans along the way. You just need to have the plans to stay focused if you're one of those people that can't stay focused. And I've run into a lot of folks who are like that. A lot of folks can't get through a first draft, and that's usually why. It also will help to remind you, if you're one of those people who's constantly going back and editing, like, okay, I wrote chapter 1, but it just wasn't perfect. I got to go fix it and make it perfect before I go on to chapter 2. Not necessarily. If you know where you're going for chapter 3, you know exactly what you want to happen, just keep writing, because you can always go back to chapter 1. It's already there. And you even know kind of what it's supposed to do as it feeds into the end. So having those targets gives you a reason to keep going, because it's sometimes I find that people who are really obsessed with making what they've already written right is because they don't really know where they're going. Knowing where you're going and forward momentum is the absolute key to finishing first drafts. It's about knowing the direction and always moving in that direction. If you find a problem, make a note. Keep going forward. You can come back to it and fix it later. You know, you want to change a character, do that in the second draft. But having this this outline plan, these plot targets is what I like to call them, is a good way to always keep yourself headed in the right direction. And that's really the long and the short of what I like to do for outlining. Bart says the writing police are coming for him. They have taps on his computer. They're watching me. Yes. All right. I understand. Oh, excuse me. Throat's getting dry. Oh, let's see here. I'm going to take a second and read a couple of these here. Sorry if there's dead air, but let's see. Bill says, so if you have multiple characters, should you focus on a plot point for each character arc, or should they be targets for the story overall? I would say the story overall. Now, if you're like Josh and you write out each character's arc separately, then maybe you want to do it for each character. I don't know. I don't write that way. I tend to write very linear. And I kind of know, like a lot of times I do have two main characters. I tend to like to do that. And if they have very disparate things, I might have two plot points for each one of them. But generally speaking, I would say do it for the story overall, unless you're one of those people who likes to write out the entire arc for a character and then break it up and mix the whole thing into a big novel salad. That may be the way Josh does it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm sure he wouldn't care if you reached out and asked him. Let's see here. James McCormick, don't really care about plot, more a story guy. Okay. James, I don't know how that breaks apart. Novels. Story is kind of organic. Plot is like formulaic. I don't know that I agree with that, Christy. Christy says that story and plot are two different things. Story is organic. Plot is formulaic. Plot is, this is the way I look at it. Plot is the skeleton. Story is the flesh on the skeleton. Right. Okay. And James says that plot is the obstacles your character faces. Right. That's the obstacles. That's the conflict. But without conflict, you don't have a story. That's kind of what story is. It's a character wanting something. Things are telling him he can't get it, and then him overcoming that. I think the two are not mutually exclusive. I think you really can't have one without the other. Blah, 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 blah. Christy, Bart says he's with me. I'm not trying to turn this into a debate, guys. I can tell you the plot of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but you won't get the full story. Right. Like I said, plot's the skeleton. The story's the flesh on the skeleton. But without the plot, you can't really get the story. Without the plot, it's just a bunch of people kind of sitting around talking to each other, which is boring. Oh, it's a blurred line. You're right, Bart. It can be. So we have stop trying to start a fight, Bart. So we have talked about how we want to do research, how I like to do research. We've researched our characters. We've gotten faces and things like that for them. We have talked about getting the places together, maps, pictures, things like that. We've talked about researching things, how we want to pay attention to the objects that I'm not sorry. Again, guys, JR is trying to bait me by calling Scrivener the devil, but that's just JR. We've talked about researching the pertinent things to your story and how you want to do that. And that basically all just comes down to just finding it and learning as much as you can about the things. Now we've talked about the outlining, you have some plot points you're working towards. Always have something that you can write to keep you motivated, to keep you focused, to keep you going forward. Doesn't have to be 8 plot points. It could be 5. It could be 3. You really have to play with it and write some more until you find what works for you. And really, I tell you, I kind of find myself at the point now where we have set our goal, which is our questions. We have gathered intelligence, which is doing our research. We formulated a plan, which is, excuse me again, which is our planning as much as you choose to do of that. We have a roadmap basically of how we want to get from once upon a time to the end. At this point, we come to executing the plan. Now, this is the part where I really, because this is the part. Let's see. I'm sorry. Kayleen says found targets in the questions. Yes, the questions, the idea is, you have a protagonist, you have the problem, which is usually, say, an antagonist in the case of what I've come up with. You know that this one wants something and this one wants something, and there are things that are going to keep this one and this one from getting what they want. By knowing that from the idea and having the questions, you can start them out with wanting, and then as you're putting out your plot points, you throw the obstacles and the successes and the failures in there. That's how the two work together. The idea is like the core and the heart, and you use that, and the plotting and planning kind of is expanding that out into the obstacles and the eventual resolution with that small thing. And then the plotting and the planning is how you turn it into, okay, it's easy right now. It's harder because this thing happened at this point. It could be getting hurt or a fight or something important gets destroyed, whatever. But you add that stuff in during the plotting phase. Does that answer your question, Kayleen? Oh, that's a cute little emoji. I'm going to take that as a yes. So now we're to the execute the plan phase of the whole thing. And like I said a second ago, I can't do a lot for you at this point, because this is where you just sit down and write the damn book. That's it. I mean, you've got your research, you've got your idea, you've got your plan, your roadmap. Now it's time to just sit down and write. And, that's the fun part. Let's face it. That's, to me anyway, because that is the part where I can do the discovery writing and I can see where this story takes me. I can see if these ideas are working, from a narrative standpoint. But how you get the words on the page, I hear you, Christy. How you get the ideas on the page, how you get the words on the page, good God, that is kind of up to you. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people want to sit down and just write for 10 minutes if that's all they've got in a day. Well, if that's all you can do, that's what you do. Some people want to set a word count every day. I am going to write 1,000 words a day, no matter what, no matter how many times I have to do it in 10-minute spurts or whatever. They're going to have those word counts, and that's their goal. That's what motivates them, and that's what they're going to do. Some people have much larger goals. Some people much smaller. It's different from person to person to person to person, because we all have different lives. If you've got 3 kids and a full-time job, it might be hard to find time to write. But if you're willing to sacrifice other things to make the time, you can get it. And you just have to be realistic about how much you can do in a day without, injuring your health or anything like that. No story is worth making yourself sick. Now, as far as, see, this is tough because everybody has a different method. And Ralph did a great little thing, Facebook Live thing a week or two ago about writing sprints. This is a really, really good method if you've got the time. If you have large blocks of time to sit down and write, maybe you're a stay-at-home parent or something like myself, you sit down, this is the way I do it. I sit down in the mornings after I got my family off to school and work and everything, and I've got the house to myself. I come into my office, I sit down, I got my coffee, I pull up my whatever I'm working on. I will read a big chunk of what I did the day before. I will even, like, if I see some obvious typos or something like that, I'll correct them. If I see a really awkward turn of phrase, I'll correct that. But I'll spend a few minutes familiarizing myself with what I did the day before. And I will, kind of get my head back into that space. Sometimes I'll have some music playing, usually movie soundtracks or something related to the genre I'm working in. Sometimes not. That's hit or miss. But I'll let myself kind of get into that headspace for whatever I'm working on. Then when I get down to where I finished the day before, I will take my phone. I will start a 30-minute timer, and I'll set the timer, and I start to typing. And I don't worry about how good what I'm writing is. I don't worry if I write typos. I don't worry if it's, if I mess up, if my fingers aren't loose yet, whatever. I just write for 30 minutes. And I try to stay in the story. I try to stay with the characters. I try to stay focused for that 30 minutes. Boom, 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 boom. When the timer goes off, I'll stop. Maybe if I'm really in the groove, I'll go another minute or two just to finish what I've got in my head, but I'll stop and I'll get up and I'll walk away from my desk. And usually, because writing is such a sedentary thing, when I walk away from my desk, I might do, 10 or 15 squats and stretch out my fingers and, try to, because if you just sit still writing all the time, your body hates that shit. So I'll do that, and I will take a break for like 10 or 15 minutes. If I need another cup of coffee, I'll get another cup of coffee. Might throw some dishes in the dishwasher, whatever I need to do. When that 10 or 15 minutes is up, I come back. I set another 30-minute thing, off to the races. I have a set word count every day, and usually I will hit that word count. Lately, I've had a lot going on that's kind of kept me from doing it. But anyway, that's how I get it done. Word sprints are great if you've got the time to do them. But how you execute that plan, how you take the research and the planning and all the other stuff and actually get the book written is kind of up to you. And there's a lot of people out there that will give you a lot of great advice on how to do it. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be a matter of you sitting down, or if you're standing up, and just doing it and seeing what works and what doesn't. If you can't sit down and do a writing sprint in the morning, maybe you need to wait till your family's in bed at night and not watch your favorite TV show or something. I mean, I don't know, whatever your situation is. Maybe you need to give up video games. You have to kind of find what works for you to get the plan executed and get the book done. Is that what James, you said the Pomodoro method. Is that what I'm describing? Setting timers for writings and for breaks. Yes, I knew there was a name for it, and I was trying to think of it while I was talking, and I couldn't. But yes, the Pomodoro method, where you set timers for productivity and rest. That's basically what writing sprints are. And also to that, speaking to that again, maybe 30 minutes is too long for you, or not long enough. Maybe you only need to do a 20-minute sprint and then a 15-minute break, or maybe you need to do a 45-minute sprint and a 10-minute break. Again, you have to play with it and play with it and play with it until you find what works for you. And the only way that's going to happen is if you sit down and write. That's the big thing, is doing it. Forward momentum. That's the key. That kind of wraps up the whole thing. I know I said I was going to do 5 of these, but as I looked at it, in a classroom, these things take a little longer because I'm getting questions while I'm talking and all this stuff. This is the first time I've tried to do it on the internet, so it went a lot faster. So at this point, I'm going to just say, do you guys have anything you want to ask me about anything I've said? Because, as I've said numerous times, and I'm sure y'all probably sick of hearing it, I've done this for a while, so I'm hopefully there was some value to this for you. Anything at all, guys? Oh, there's that dead air again. I'm going to get in trouble. Okay, well, I mean, that's it. do all that stuff. If you followed along with me, get your idea, do your research, map out a little plan, and get to writing. That's, I mean, I know that's breaking it down that simply. It sounds like a no-brainer, but J.R. Handel will accept it with Scrivener. I'm going to send ninjas to your house, man. Seriously, they're coming. You better sleep with one eye open, pal. It sounds like a no-brainer, you know, because I'm basically just saying just do the work. But if you break it into those steps and you're focused on it and you have that plan, I really believe if you're someone that struggles with getting a first draft done, that focus is what is going to change your whole writing life. I've actually, I'm not saying that I personally did it, but I have seen people go from kind of meandering with no idea where they're going to just plotting out a few points and having a firm grasp on the idea and the characters. I've seen it take people from having a dozen unfinished beginnings to finished manuscripts. And I really believe that if you're someone that struggles with that, it will help. And I really believe that if you're going to do NaNoWriMo, having all this done prior to November 1 will be a lot of help, because when November 1 hits, all you're going to have to do is sit down and start writing your words. So that's it. Let's see. Kayleen says her favorite thing was what if questions. Yes. Just don't let them get carried away, Kayleen. It's kind of like world building. You could go what if all day long. So try to keep the what if questions to the core of your story idea. Yeah, I can send ninjas. Who do you think you're dealing with, Bard? Come on, please. Kara, hey girl, how you doing? Super helpful, right balance of structure and fun. Thank you, Kara. I appreciate it. I always feel like I'm rambling when I do these things. Okay, well, guys, please, if you have any questions, if something occurs to you after we've gone off the air, if there's anything at all you want to ask me, you can reach out to me on the Keystroke Medium group, or if you want to send me a private email, you can go through my website, www.cstevenmanley.net. And there's a contact me thing there. You don't have to give me your address or anything like that. You can just reach out to me with your question, and I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion. And, you know, I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you get something out of it. And I hope that everybody can take it and use it to finish your manuscripts. And or if you've already finished manuscripts, maybe you found something to help speed up your process. I don't know, but I hope it was useful, and I appreciate it. And no, never mind. Keeping that to myself. Yeah. So JR, watch for the ninjas. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.